Hey, this is Chris at Art Secret Studio, and we've come up with something we want to talk about, and that's fat over lean. And there is quite a discrepancy about that because of products like Galkyd, which has alkyd in it. And when do you use stand oil and mix it to Gamasol? When do you use Galkyd and mix it to Gamasol? And when do you just use Gamasol, which is mineral spirits? And I realized a lot of that's really not the issue. The issue is transparent colors as opposed to opaque colors. So the minute you start using an opaque color, you better have a medium in it or have enough pigment that you haven't thinned it out that you're actually glazing with an opaque color, because when the Gamasol dries, it will just flake off and peel. So let's just go over a couple brush strokes and things and see if we can evaluate what's going on. So what happens first, I start with a transparent color. So when I draw something in, I use a lot of brush cleaner. I thin it out. So I'm looking at this picture of Yellowstone, and I might just thin it out. And one thing I do when I draw, though, every mark I make is a different thickness, a different sharpness. It's a different speed. I'm sort of drawing my roadmap, telling you where I'm going to look. I'm putting in the poles, the pylons, a little bit of the trees. Maybe I'll start to add some different colors. And it's incredibly thin, and there's no white of whatsoever on my brush. And I can start to put in some of the greens, start to wash it in. Start to put in some of the darks, especially in the dark areas. You're really wanting to, I'm very careful not to put brown in a green area in the initial wash. I want to keep green with the green and brown in the brown. Later on, I'll harmonize. There's a shadow here, and I'm just keeping it kind of thin, washing it in. And I wish that was green and not brown. Pretend that was green. I might take some blue and put that blue sky in. Now my tone is wet and therefore it's coming through. Usually I tone the day before. That's when I take one color and wipe it over the whole thing. And I wash in the blue and I thin it out, and I also take my fan brush and I will soften my edges. And you'll see me do this cross hatching where I'm making these broken lines and I'll go different directions. So no edge is left. I might leave one part of an edge, but not all of it. I might leave just part of the roof, but not all. You can see the cross hatching going on. And this is a very thin wash for me to start. And I'm not worried about the scene. And I'm just kind of getting my feet wet, washing it in. And then I might either, start to go a little stronger into my painting. And all of a sudden now there's a little less brush cleaner in my painting. And if I just paint like this, I don't have to worry about fat over lean. You get in trouble once you start adding all these different mediums. So I'm going a little stronger in my color, a little stronger in my shadows, and I'm relying on the oil that's in the paint. There's linseed oil in the paint, and it is the binder that holds it together. So I'm putting in this oil, I'm going a little darker. My marks are different. Every time I make a mark, it's a different length. I pull, I make a shadow. I'm working up my composition. I'm just kind of trying to create a variation, a depth, variety. And then I'm picking out a color. And then I'm gonna fan again. And I'm fanning all with these transparent colors. I'm making these crosshatch marks. Sometimes I obliterate, sometimes I leave the mark sharp, and sometimes I actually draw with the fan brush and leave it. I make the hair while it's dry, or the grass, not hair. I make those marks now and I can pull them up. I can break edges, I can get rid of edges, and that may dry, or I can keep going darker and stronger with my color. So as I start to go a little darker in some of these areas and a little stronger, I'm still going to have a variety of the way I make a mark. I'm going to pull, I'm going to drag. I'll smear it. I'll take that fan brush, I'll soften with my brush first before I do it with the fan. I'm just going a little faster than I want to. Some of the strokes I'm gonna leave, others I'll get rid of if I don't like them. I'm creating that crosshatch look. And here's where the painting's basically all I can do today. I'm pretty much done. I'm leaving the yellow out till later. I don't have yellow green, imagine I did. I'll start adding some yellow green now. I could go in with some garish green and start to put those colors in, start to put in the opaque color. And I'm just using the opaque color as a mixture, nothing in it. Nothing in it. And I'm starting to cover the canvas with the paint. And it gets a little lighter, and it's not the real color that I'm after yet. And there's some of this lighter stuff in here, and it's a little thicker. But my brush strokes are gonna vary. I'll put some lighter stuff here. I'll put some lighter over the dark. So when I fan before I put the thick paint down, it keeps the transparent color cleaner. So now when I fan over the opaque, I don't have to fan the whole thing, and it over fans and destroys the color. I'm leaving some strokes that I think are neat. Now there's only 2 I left. I got rid of all the other. That's a low percentage. Never mind. We'll deal with that another day. So I've taken the painting as far as I can. I would have done more with the trees, things like that. You get the idea. Now here's the problem, day 2. Imagine it's dried. I cannot clean my brush with brush cleaner, thin it out. I can in this area because there's no paint, but in this area where there's opaque paint, I can't thin this out like this, where it's watery like this, or even lighter, over areas that have paint. That will crack. Each layer must have more oil. When the paint is thick, keep in mind, this is how they make oil. You have dry pigment, you might use a filler, calcium carbonate, whatever it is, or not, and you have pigment, okay, it's sienna dirt. And then you add 2 drops of oil to it, and you grind it together, and you make paint. The next day you add 3 drops of oil, and the next day you work on it and you do 4 drops of oil. So there's more oil in the painting each day you paint. It's called fat oil over lean, no oil. If you don't use a medium, you're doing great. Just thin it out, wash it in, and then gradually use less and less turpentine or brush cleaner or mineral spirits, and then just use paint, and you're home free. But we've all fell in love with, Velasquez medium and, Impasto medium and Oleogel and Stand Oil and Galkyd, and they all make different kinds of marks. And you have to know when to use them. I believe it's the opaque colors causing the problem. So if I was painting a yellow-green pear, hypothetically, of course, and I want it part of the yellow-green darker, let me know if I'm off track here. And I thinned out my darker green and put it over my thicker dried yellow-green pear. Am I correct? Is that what you did? And 2 months later, it cracked. It's the opaque color that's the culprit. So now, as I start to paint, if this was dry, I would take 50-50 Galkyd and Gamsol. If I needed thinner marks to continue this, these brush strokes and things like this, and I'm going over this stuff that it's dry, then when I thinned it out, there's something in it, whether it's Galkyd or Stand Oil, and you'll have to figure out which you like. But there's oil in it, So when you thin it out, this dry stuff that's going to evaporate has oil in it because the stuff underneath it that's opaque. So if I take this and I drag this over this, if this was dry and did this to that, okay, that brown, if I thinned out with Gamasol, it would have less oil in it than the thicker yellow-green out of the tubes oil in it. And now you got lean over fat. And we saw it crack 2 months later. Okay? So the problem is, the minute you start using opaque paint, you need something in your paint. There's one more problem. Okay? And that is, if I start taking my opaque paint and I thin it out with brush cleaner like this, and I start painting on it with brush cleaner, what happens with that opaque paint, and I'm gonna help it. What happens is you have diluted the oil that's in the opaque paint. So what makes paint opaque is the size of the particles are so big that when you put it in a product, that oil that dries like Jello, and you can see the flakes in them, when the particles evaporate or dry, you can see the flakes. So the more you thin out an opaque color, the uglier it appears. And then if you glaze over it and you thin out the oil in the opaque, all you have, if I just take this opaque and thin it out with brush cleaner and go over my pre-existing dry painting, then that brush cleaner is going to evaporate, and all I'm going to have is big flakes of dirt on my canvas, and it's going to be ugly and crack and peel and drop off. So the minute you've covered the canvas, you need to start thinking about dipping into something that has oil in it if you want it to be thin. Now, if you don't want to thin it out with brush cleaner and make it thin, then go for it. You don't have to do any of this. After day 1 or 2 of washing these in with thin coats or whatever, you're at day or 3 or 4, just start painting, but don't thin it out and make a glaze with it. The minute you glaze, you must add something to it. Now, can I glaze with opaque color? Yes, but you have to do it with products like Oleogel. It's one of the only products on the market that allows you to glaze with Oleogel, with a product. And the reason you're doing that is when you thin that product out, the turpentine or brush cleaner or mineral spirits is not evaporating. The Jello in Oleogel is suspending it in its product. So you can make those marks. I probably wouldn't use linseed oil or sand oil. But once you start using opaque color, you need something with more base, and that would be Oleogel. And it would make more of the marks you're making than if you use sand oil and Gamasol or Galkyd and Gamasol. So if you want to keep layering and make all this variety of strokes, the minute you add opaque color, start using Oleogel. Does that make sense? And yeah, just Oleogel. Well, if you thin it out too much, it doesn't want to dry. Oleogel relies heavily on the amount of dryer in the pigment. It's not expediting the drying on its own. So if you thin out that color too much and you're just using Oleogel, it may not dry. It can be forever. So I tend to dip my brush in a little Galkyd and then into the Oleogel, and then use the Oleogel, and the Galkyd on my brush hairs is enough for it to dry quicker. Okay, I don't know if I answered that question, but I think I saw the problem. What's bothering me is if you do that with an opaque color.
I heard a Johnny Cochran quote in your analysis. I want to hear it play back.
Johnny Cochran, the football coach for UGA?
No, the attorney.
The attorney.
Oh,
Simpson.
If the glove doesn't fit, don't use it?
You said no lean over fat or it will crack. So that reminded me, if the glove fits, you must have fit. That's the way my mind works. No lean over fat or it will crack. Or it will crack.
Good job, Jeff. I like it.
That way I can remember
Chuck, when do you have to be back at the home?
when the bus shows up.
So the medium, like Galkyd, stand oil seems so thick.
Yeah, to me it's the
So-
latest, it's at the end of the
So
painting.
that's should
Way at
be-
the end.
And,
You
but
can
you
set-
can layer on top of.
I never use walnut oil. I never use poppy oil.
Mhm.
I start with I start with brush cleaner.
Mhm.
I then go thicker and thicker without brush cleaner, and then I'm pretty much painting.
Mhm.
Whether it's opaque or transparent, it's just I'm not diluting, and it's thicker. Then once it's covered, I have this weird habit. Typically, I then glaze, and it seals the surface so nothing sinks in. And after I glaze the whole thing and do that, then I start to say, okay, now what's going on? And if I need to start adding thicker mediums and brush strokes, it's always a Glazing Galkyd, and that's a safe mixture.